Welcome to this explainer on the anatomy of a disruption. Today, we're looking at how the Rare Character Whiskey Company is fundamentally reshaping the American whiskey landscape. Over the next few minutes, we're going to trace a pretty fascinating journey. We'll see how a brand that started as a pandemic startup back in 2021 rapidly evolved into an auction-dominating powerhouse, scooping up some of the most coveted barrels in the country along the way.
Okay, let's dive right into this. We'll be breaking down 6 key areas: the rare character disruption, sourcing through industry networks, mastering experimental wood finishes, adaptive labels and wax codes, resurrecting legacy bourbon brands, and finally, the future of high-aged whiskey.
Section 1. The Rare Character Disruption.
Now, to really understand their impact, you have to look at the industry standard. Major global bourbon brands are built on one foundational pillar, and that's absolute, unwavering consistency. Rare Character totally shattered that mold by offering the exact opposite. They give you bespoke, highly curated discovery experiences that prioritize odd, unusual, and distinctly exceptional barrels. Which brings us to a rather stunning question. Will this be the next American whiskey brand to command $100,000 at auction? And I pose this with absolute seriousness. Industry experts are already comparing their trajectory to legendary independent bottlers like Linnell's Red Hook Rye or Julian Van Winkle's Old Commonwealth. Bottles that are now basically the unquestioned holy grails of whiskey collecting.
So, the crucial point here is this wild multiplier. We're talking about bottles that carry a suggested retail price of around $99, but they're routinely commanding 10 times that amount on secondary markets and at prestigious auction houses like Sotheby's. It's crazy. This is all driven by an intense, almost feverish collector demand for the unique, completely unrepeatable flavor profiles they consistently put out.
Section 2. Sourcing through industry networks. Because listen, you simply cannot sell exceptional whiskey if you can't find it in the first place. And the secret behind acquiring such coveted liquid in an era of extreme scarcity comes down to one guy, co-founder Pablo Moix, and his unparalleled industry access. Moix's journey didn't start in a boardroom. It started behind the bar. He has deep roots in New York bartending and went on to co-found highly acclaimed Los Angeles venues like Scopa Italian Roots and Old Lightning. Through decades as an on-premise owner and vintage spirits buyer, he developed what insiders literally call a preternatural palate. But more importantly, he used his extensive hospitality background to boost his visibility and forge incredibly tight, trusting relationships with master distillers. These vital connections are what allow him to unlock experimental barrels and rare overedges hidden in distillery vaults that are otherwise entirely closed to the public. Moix actually summed up his whole philosophy perfectly. He said, "I didn't want to do craft. I'll find good, interesting whiskey, bottle it, and sell it. A modern Linnell." By deliberately bypassing the traditional startup craft distillery route, which, as we know, requires years of aging, young, unproven distillate, Moix focused purely on curation. He hunts down that spectacularly aged liquid that major brands pass over simply because it doesn't fit their standard corporate flavor profiles.
And this curation reaches its absolute peak with their premium sub-brand, the Exceptional Series. Reserved exclusively for liquid that's at least 9 years old, this series is entirely focused on scarcity and meticulous quality. A real standout here is their highly acclaimed Kentucky straight malt whiskeys, featuring a 65% malt mash bill that enthusiasts widely believe is sourced directly from Heaven Hill. It is bold, incredibly flavorful, and strictly limited.
Section 3. Mastering experimental wood finishes.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is that beyond just finding great whiskey, Rare Character elevates it further using non-traditional woods. Take their Native Wood series, for example. This specific line utilizes experimental finishing woods to deliberately challenge traditional bourbon norms. A prime example is their acclaimed use of Anbarana wood, a wood native to the jungles of South America. By utilizing these highly novel barrel finishes, they're really pushing the envelope on what American whiskey can actually taste like.
Mastering these experimental, one-off finishing projects is exactly how Rare Character creates these distinct, highly sought-after flavor profiles for consumers craving genuine discovery. Take their famous Obliteration release. It's a 14-year-old bourbon finished in a California winery cask that actually survived a wildfire, and it was eventually bottled at a staggering 143.7 proof. No joke. By leaning into these odd or unusual sensory characteristics, they make sure their bottles stand completely apart from mass-produced global brands.
Section 4. Adaptive labels and wax codes.
So sourcing and finishing incredible liquid is really only half the battle, right? Visual marketing is what actually drives competitive retail engagement.
Historically, when a retailer or a club bought a single barrel of whiskey, they'd slap an amateur, kind of cartoonish sticker, lovingly known in the industry as a tater sticker, onto the back of the bottle. Rare Character completely revolutionized this old standard with their bespoke adaptive labels. The bottom half of the label remains perfectly constant to satisfy strict federal TTB compliance, while the top half allows retail partners a legal, cost-efficient way to prominently showcase their own crystal clear custom branding. It's brilliant. And this brilliantly illustrates the second half of their visual genius, the wax codes. Rare Character works with over 30 different mash bills. To help enthusiasts navigate this massive portfolio, they use a color-coded wax system. Pink wax, or TKO, signifies a high-proof experimental Tennessee rye with distinct bubblegum notes. Copper wax, or RIO, means an 8-year MGP bourbon with a unique apricot and wine quality. Yellow wax, KBT, well, that's a doppelganger for Buffalo Trace's mash bill, yielding rich creamsicle flavors. Collectors can instantly decode the bottle just at a glance. So why does all this matter? Well, this bespoke artwork strategy dramatically increases consumer engagement. When a retailer selects a barrel and applies professional, highly collectible aesthetics to the label, it creates a sense of profound ownership and exclusivity. It literally transforms a simple bottle of whiskey into a true piece of art that routinely sells out in a matter of minutes. Section 5. Resurrecting Legacy Bourbon Brands. While Rare Character is obviously incredibly innovative, a major part of their overall strategy involves reviving dormant historical brand names. There's honestly no better example of this than the fascinating rise, fall, and resurrection of Black Maple Hill. In the 2000s, this was an elite label built on legendary sourcing from places like the hollowed Stitzel-Weller distillery. But as old stocks dried up, they made a highly controversial pivot in 2014 to sourcing young Oregon craft whiskey, which quickly fractured their fan base. Enter Rare Character in 2025. They acquired this fractured legacy label and are executing an absolute masterstroke of a revival by injecting it with premium 11 and 16-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon stocks. And just to show this isn't some one-off tactic, we gotta look at Fortuna. This is another historic legacy brand they've successfully resurrected. Unlike their typical single-barrel offerings, this historic 6-year-old, 102-proof Kentucky straight bourbon proves their sheer mastery of the sourced and blended legacy model, reintroducing true old-world tradition to the modern market. Section 6. The Future of High-Aged Whiskey. Let's move to the future and see how this builds. As we look at how Rare Character is adapting to its own meteoric success, we can see a clear shift in their long-term sourcing strategy. Directly influenced by intense auction demand and a collector base hungry for extreme age and complexity, they're actually depleting their younger stocks entirely to focus heavily on 8-plus-year-old Kentucky whiskeys. They're also expanding into intricate 3 to 5 barrel microblends, beautifully showcased in their Rare Character Limited Release, or RCLR program, which marries multi-age barrels for just unparalleled depth. So, if independent bottlers with preternatural palates and deep industry networks are finally unlocking the oldest, most tightly guarded vaults in the country, what does this actually mean for the future accessibility of truly premium American whiskey? It's a provocative thought, isn't it? Perhaps the Rare Character disruption is the very first sign that the agonizing scarcity of legendary, age-stated bourbons is finally beginning to ease. Thank you for joining me for this explainer.